The hour of Marathon's launch is almost upon us. The game comes out on March 5th, 2026, and they recently hosted what was called the Server Slam, which is essentially like an open beta where players get to try the game out and provide feedback. And while I personally don't feel like I've played the game enough where I can really judge the game, I have been seeing a lot of the online activity surrounding it. And what I want to discuss in this video isn't necessarily, how people are enjoying the game, because on that front, it's all over the place. There are people who have really enjoyed Marathon and all of the adjustments that they've made since announcement, and others are still like pretty iffy about it, and whether this game will be enough to take the extraction shooter genre out of this very niche place, whether this endeavor can be as successful or more successful than Destiny. All of that remains to be seen, but what we can analyze is the existing data based on the recent Server Slam beta. Now, one thing I will compliment Bungie for is the fact that since the game's announcement, on top of the delay, they really did listen to feedback, and they did somewhat manage to turn optics around. It's not universally positive, but it is a lot more positive than it was when it was first announced. Once upon a time, Marathon was mired with controversy because of the art theft and plagiarism fiasco. And then there's the fact that when people saw the game announced and when there were early playtests, there was just a lot of feedback that suggested the game felt like it needed a lot more polish, a lot more refinement. But ever since then, they did implement the most requested features. They did make a ton of adjustments based on that feedback. And things like the visuals have come a long way. Right here we have the video from, 10 months ago, back in April 12th, 2025. You can see the likes to dislikes ratio was just a lot more severe, and the visuals at the time just looked a little flat. But now the game just looks significantly better. They definitely overhauled the visuals and enough aspects of gameplay where people have felt the improvement. And you can see that reflected in the likes to dislikes ratio being significantly better than where it used to be months ago. And so I do want to celebrate when studios do take feedback seriously, when they do make adjustments that can pave the road to more positive sentiments and optics. But the ultimate question is, will Marathon be enough to keep Bungie sustained as a company who is heavily reliant on live service and monetization? And will this endeavor be something that will be worthwhile for Sony and PlayStation, who are now the overlords of Bungie after having purchased the company? Will the billions spent on purchasing Bungie and the, no doubt, millions, hundreds of millions spent on developing Marathon yield the results that they want? Will it meet the expectations that are there internally? And there's a lot riding on Marathon because Destiny right now is dying off. This once upon a time was Bungie's calling card. It was the thing that kept Bungie afloat, that kept revenue coming. But you can see that Destiny is kind of in the worst shape it's ever been when it comes to player retention. You can see that for the most part, it was always able to stay in like the mid to high quintuple digits. And that was always consistent up until recently, when those numbers have dipped so low that we're now delving into the quadruple digits territory. And that's in large part to do with the fact that many people feel as though Destiny 2 has had its run. They did release like this big DLC that kind of wrapped up a lot of the narrative elements, and they've tried to continue to sustain this live service through additional content additions, but those just have not lived up to the peaks of this game. There's recently been like a major delay for a major content release, and so there's just this general sense that interest surrounding Destiny 2 is starting to fade, and that Bungie faces an uphill battle in trying to win those players back, and that a lot of their future prospects will be reliant on how Marathon performs, given how much they're pouring into this game and how much Marathon has detracted from Destiny as an IP and as a product. And despite the fact that sentiment surrounding Marathon has become more positive since its original announcement, the fact remains that the trend surrounding how players are engaging with this title will ultimately decide the fate of Marathon as a game, of Bungie as a studio, and will decide Sony and PlayStation's decisions moving forward. And that's the area where I am a little concerned about Marathon, because while it's not doing terrible numbers by any means, it's also not breaking any new grounds. I don't get the indication that Marathon will be able to reach the levels that Destiny did in terms of popularity and player engagement and attracting a mass audience. Looking at how the Server Slam performed. You can see that it peaked at an all-time concurrent player number of 143,621 players. And one thing that has to be highlighted about the Server Slam is that this is essentially the only time in which this game is free to the public, because the final game will launch at a price point of $40, $60 if you buy the deluxe edition, but there is a premium base price point that you have to pay in order to gain entry to the game. And so the question right now is Marathon hyped enough that when the game launches, people will buy this game en masse, and the all-time peak numbers for Marathon in the paid version when it finally launches will be higher than this free version? Because if we start seeing that the game launches and those all-time peak numbers don't surpass the free Server Slam, then immediately we'll know that this game might be in a little bit of trouble. And then there's the fact that Marathon has consistently trended downwards with each playtest, with each time they've opened the game up to either a limited public or the entire public in this case. While it started really strong, you can see that those numbers did start to trend downwards, not at a degree that kind of causes high guard levels of red flags in terms of it not being a viable live service. You can tell that this game will definitely have longer legs than High Guard and Concord, and in terms of quality and the interest surrounding this particular live service, I do believe it to be in a better position than Concord and High Guard, especially because it does come from a veteran studio like Bungie, who have made a name for themselves and whose new releases do draw a lot of interest and curiosity and attention. This isn't necessarily the worst trend I've seen, but it is enough of a downwards trend that it makes me concerned about Marathon's viability over the long term. Because at the end of the day, with Marathon, with live services, it's not just about one big launch. It's about the retention of those players. It's about seeing those numbers stabilize or even grow over the course of time. Comparing it to other extraction shooter launches like Arc Raiders being kind of the big one right now, you can see that during its playtest, during its open beta, we saw all-time peaks of almost 190,000 players, which is already like a decent amount more than Marathon's numbers. And then when Arc Raiders did launch, even with that price point of $40, even with that premium price tag, it managed to launch at greater numbers than the playtest. And then you can see this trend is pretty incredible. It is completely sustained. It actually increased after launch, and it dipped for a second just a little bit, but it came back up. And this is very sustained across multiple months. This is an incredibly healthy live service. And even now, 24-hour peaks are looking incredible with over 252,000 players coming back. And it's a question of, will Bungie be able to achieve something similar where at launch, the initial numbers will actually be greater than the free playtest despite that premium price tag? And when we see those numbers, kind of fluctuate in this fashion where it overall seems to stabilize and indicate a strong sense of players coming back at a consistent rate? Or will the trend be more akin to the playtest where, there's enough of a downwards trend that in the long term, will not see this game be able to be a sustainable live service? Another example of a positive trend is Hunt Showdown. You can see right here, this is a game that started out fairly humbly, but it continued to grow over time. And while it hasn't achieved popularities on the level of something like Arc Raiders, you can see that it's only improving and getting more and more popular. And this is one of the de facto titles known in the extraction shooter genre. This is one of Marathon's main competition. And the question is Marathon just as interesting, if not more interesting, than Hunt Showdown and Arc Raiders? And does Marathon stand out enough? Does it do unique enough things that it will be able to pull players away from these de facto experiences? Then you have Twitch numbers that also highlight a downwards trend. You can see right here in terms of viewerships and channels who do stream the game that overall, it's a pretty significant loss of interest over a pretty quick amount of time. There's this weird peak that happened at this particular time frame, and I don't know why, but you can see that it went right back down to the usual trend, and this is how the game trended before the playtest, the Server Slam, ended. It's just not a confidence-inspiring trend. It doesn't necessarily mean guaranteed doom and gloom, but it does highlight that this is a game that doesn't have a certain level of mass appeal, that people are checking it out, but it's tough for a game like this that has so many systems and that is kind of complicated and intricate, and that is tackling a genre that is currently niche and has more of like a sweaty gamer kind of vibe, quote unquote, if you will. You can see that is causing for something that isn't necessarily as accessible, or that has the level of mass appeal that Destiny did. Whereas with something like Arc Raiders, I'll once again highlight just the incredibly consistent trend here. The retention here is just on another level. You can see it's basically like overall a really positive trend for a game that has retained its popularity and a significant portion of its player base for many, many months. And if they continue to do right by this game, can continue for many years. And Hunt Showdown once again shows a similar trend to the Steam charts, where it only got more popular as time went by, and it is currently the most popular that it's ever been. And then looking at Steam's top sellers, you can see that Marathon is in third place, which is, not anything to scoff at. But the fact that it's not at number one, the fact that its current sales just like a day or two prior to launch are still close enough to Arc Raiders might indicate that it's going to sell well, but will it sell explosively enough? Will the live service engagement and retention and monetization be engaged at a high enough level that it will meet Bungie's expectations as well as Sony and PlayStation's expectations based on the amount of time and manpower and money that was kind of poured into this project based on its overall budget? And the thing about Marathon is that while, again, feedback is a lot more positive now than it was at launch, and I really commend Bungie for the degree to which they engaged with the community and did take that feedback seriously and kind of did what Highguard should have done, actually playtest the game despite their pedigree as developers who have worked on some of the most successful IPs, still treating Marathon as its own thing that needs its own refinements and not getting cocky on that front and showing some humility and showing a willingness to kind of work with the community. All of that I think does make for a more positive outlook. With that said, feedback surrounding Marathon has been mixed enough. There are enough people who ultimately came away from Marathon feeling unsure about it, not feeling like this is a bad game, but also not feeling like this is a game that they would sit down and play for many years to come. I've seen enough of that aspect of things as well that I'm really concerned about Marathon's longevity and its ability to keep its gameplay loop genuinely fun for not just a couple weeks, but months upon months. Arc Raiders has its own set of issues, but the feedback surrounding the game has been so universally positive. It's been something that has made so many headlines. The community surrounding it has been talked about a lot with just how supportive everyone is, and it's fostered just such a great environment to the point where overwhelmingly positive acclaim for it managed to kind of make it stand out, managed to make it something that people could confidently say will have incredibly long legs. Marathon just doesn't have quite that on the level that Arc Raiders did. And for something like Marathon, where the stakes are high, where you've got corporate executives from Sony and PlayStation keeping a very close eye on it, where you've got a studio like Bungie being fully dependent on it and wanting it to be just as successful, if not more, than Destiny, at the very least, build this IP up to be able to be that level of success, because Destiny right now is kind of fallen off, and so they have to rely on Marathon success for them to be able to move forward with their head held high and to be able to do so confidently without prospects of layoffs and, potentially having to kind of scrape some corners when it comes to the studio's viability. All of that ultimately does pave the road to continued concern that Marathon, despite its best efforts and despite some really great efforts recently with the graphical and gameplay adjustments and overhauls, might not just from an objective, factual number standpoint be able to overcome the challenges that it faces and the high bar, the incredibly high bar that it has to meet. With all that said, I do hope that Bungie continues this interaction with the community. I hope that in the long term, that kind of two-way street proves to be effective enough that ultimately Marathon does eventually start trending upwards and stabilizes and garners an audience base that, is able to hopefully really enjoy what Marathon puts forward, because I do want this game to be better than people expect it to be. I would look forward to Marathon being an incredible success, but just seeing the landscape of everything from a bird's eye view, I do think Marathon faces challenges. I do think retention will be difficult because of the kind of game that it is and how much more niche its audience is. And because Marathon's gameplay loop, just the general sense is that while the shooting mechanics and all the moment-to-moment gameplay stuff is just, exquisite, because Bungie's just an expert when it comes to first-person shooter gameplay, the gameplay loop itself might not have the level of appeal that Destiny's gameplay loop did. But I suppose only time will tell. In the meantime, though, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Marathon. If you played the Server Slam, did you enjoy the game more than you expected? Or did it fall short based on, your experiences with past Bungie titles, or what you look forward to when it comes to your live service experiences? And also, what do you think prospects look like for Marathon? Do you think it will find an audience that will keep coming back? Do you think there's potential for it to be a successful long-term live service? Or do you think that Marathon will fade away over time and it ultimately won't be able to attract the audience and attract the attention and the retention that it needs in order to justify the immense amount of cost that went into it? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.